Good morning. Hey, thanks for being here this early in the morning, especially all you East Coast folks. I know actually, it's not that early for you. It was late last night for you. All right, so you might think that being the first person to present at this year's NACIS would give a person butterflies, and you'd be correct. But I'm going to use it as an opportunity to share with you one way that I express my gratitude for living in the beautiful state of Washington, and that is mapping. And this talk in particular is about drawing color hillshade. So welcome to Washington State, a beautiful place that I'm very grateful to live in. So in the middle of high school, I moved from suburban Minneapolis, and Minnesota's largest high school with 3,000 students, to Tonasket, Washington. Yeah? Really? Okay. An eastern Washington town with an entire population of 1,000 people. So during my first fall quarter at Tonasket High School, on a very early morning before school started, I took my parents' minivan and drove it westward with a very vague plan of driving as far as I could while still getting back in time for school. So I took Highway 7 to the Loomis-Orville Road past the glassy Spectacle Lake with morning fog floating above it. And off in the distance, I could see mountains. And these snow-capped peaks that were drawing me closer were the eastern foothills of the North Cascades. And I kept driving until I reached the town of Loomis, Washington, population 150, and the nearby Similkameen River. So I'm telling you this personal anecdote about in the beginning of a presentation about drawing color hillshade, because this short but liberating road trip to the foothills of the North Cascades was the moment I fell in love with Washington State. And I believe my love of this place that we are in right now is part of the reason I'm a cartographer. So today I'm going to share my passion about this place by showing some techniques for drawing color hillshade using the North Cascades as my model. So at last year's NACIS, some of you were there. Molly O'Halloran and I gave a workshop where Molly shared her skills of watercolor mapping, and I got to share some techniques for drawing hand-drawn hillshade with graphite or pencil. And since then, I've explored a few different methods for drawing color hillshade, and the method I'm sharing today uses these graphite drawings as the base, or the starting point. So I'm building from what you're seeing in this video by adding colored pencil directly to the graphite drawings. And there's not time to show the graphite steps, but for those who want to learn that process, the link at the top of this slide will bring you to a step-by-step tutorial with some videos, like this one. Okay, so materials needed for this method are GIS mapping software, believe it or not. I used ArcMap. However, I highly encourage freehand drawing maps like this too. A nice set of graphite pencils and some blending stumps and erasers, and that's for the graphite steps. And then you'll need some artist quality colored pencils that are soft and waxy, and I prefer the Prismacolor Premiers. And you'll need some thick, high quality drawing paper. So the GIS comes into play as you trace the ridge lines of your digital hillshade. You're going to register the four corners of your drawing with the four corners of the digital map on the screen or your light box. You're then going to trace just the ridge lines, and they serve as a framework for freehand drawing the hillshade. And by registering these four corners, you can easily go back to GIS and accurately trace other data like roads and hydro. So this red square marks the area where I will be demonstrating these techniques. And that square, as previously mentioned, is in the North Cascades mountain range. So the highest point in my map is the North Gardner Mountain at 8,957 feet. And the lowest point is the Methow Valley, and it runs about 2,000 feet. But what does this area look like on the ground and not just in a DEM? Here's a photo of me and some friends on Easy Pass, which is a misnomer for a very strenuous mountain pass hike that gets quite a bit of rain and snow, and it's located just west of this map's extent. Speaking of climbing, this map also includes Liberty Bell Mountain, which is a group of majestic granitic spires with 18 different climbing routes on it, one of which is among the 50 classic climbs in North America. And here's a photo of my partner, Joe, and my friend Steve on top of the South Early Winter Spires in the Liberty Bell group. This is Liberty Bell Mountain from below, and this photo was taken from the Forest Service overlook on Highway 20, which is also known as the North Cascades Highway. So for folks who drive eastward on the North Cascades Highway, Liberty Bell also marks the transition from western to eastern Washington, which is as much of an ecological delineation as it is geographical. And there's this huge hairpin turn at the base of Liberty Bell, which also assists in welcoming travelers to the east side. Because immediately after that hairpin turn, drivers travel through this gorgeous glacially carved U-shaped valley, which happens to run along the center of my map. Is that 5 in or 5 left? 5 in. All right. Okay. And it finally delivers you into the Met Howe Valley, where the summers are hot and dry and the winters are cold and snowy. And yes, this visual journey through the North Cascades Highway is practical for cartography, specifically for color-shaded relief. Because the first step in this color hillshade method that I'm showing you is to choose your color palette. Aileen Buckley writes that the colors selected for hypsometric tinting are assumed to relate to the ground cover, typically found at various elevations in the area being mapped, and therefore, she states that choosing your tints wisely requires that you know the area you are mapping. So it's very practical, whether you're doing digital or hand-drawn color-shaded relief, to become familiar with the area. So Bernhard Jenny and Lauren Cerny write about 2 types of approaches to using color in shaded relief. The first, mentioned in the previous slide, is hypsometric tinting, which assigns colors just by elevation. And the second is color modulated, which combines some color modification to the hypsometric tints determined by the amount of sunlight illumination on a slope. So here's a schematic look at hypsometric tinting. This is a square landscape, it's not real, with a color scheme that corresponds to elevation. The lowest is at the edges and the highest is in the center. And this square represents our shaded relief, either by DEM or in our case, it's going to be with graphite pencil. And when you add them together, you get a nice shaded relief with hypsometric tinting. So let's look at just the color modulation for just the shady sides of the slope, so cooler colors. Because the slope on the left has the most sunlight illumination, no color modulation is added here. And this allows for the hypsometric tints to fully shine through. And the slope on the right has the least amount of sunlight, so it has the most intense color modulation. And the top and bottom slopes have varying degrees of illumination and corresponding degrees of color modulation. And when those color modulations are added with hypsometric tints and then combined with a grayscale shaded relief, we get a color modulated hypsometric shaded relief. Okay, so I subscribe to the idea that we should test and bend cartography rules. So I'm not telling you which colors to use here. I'm going to share the ones I used, but I want you guys to all find the ones that work for you and share them out too. So pro tip also, I said before I love the Prismacolor Premiers, but the set that I had didn't have all the hues that I wanted for my hypsometric tint. So I found that you can go online and order individual colors at about $1.30 each. And it can add up. Okay, so begin by choosing your scheme with some basic sketches to see how the colors can be shaded and illuminated. So here's the color scheme that I landed on. I know it's not easy to read, but anyways, I'll be referencing the pale sage and the apple green in a few moments. That's why I'm calling those out. Those are at my 2 lowest elevation color schemes, or colors in the scheme. And so step 2 is to go back to your GIS and add the contour lines, which are going to serve as the guidelines for the color scheme that you just chose. And this is also one of the reasons I like starting these drawings in GIS. So your contour interval is going to vary depending on your landscape and your map scale. The North Cascades are very steep, and this map's extent has a 7,000-foot elevation range. It covers 17 miles from east to west at a scale of about 1 to 70,000. So for this step, I chose a contour interval of 400 feet because it's how I wanted to group them by ranges, which is the next step in this process. Step 3, group the contours into ranges that make sense for your landscape. So a range of 1,200 feet might not make sense if you only have a full range of 500 feet to work with. And so you group your contours in ordinal ranges where the ranges of each group are determined by your expertise as cartographers and also your knowledge of the landscape. So this means that each group's range may vary in size. And so what do I mean by all that? Well, this area covers the very arid Met Howe Valley, also has wetter western slopes. There's subalpine and alpine zones, dry ponderosa forests, rock and scree fields at the higher elevations. And it also has the subalpine larch, which is a tree that only grows in these areas. And my map is right there. So these are some of the considerations I had when grouping my contour lines. And once you've grouped your contour lines into meaningful ranges, you move on to step 4, which is coloring the ranges with their assigned color. And because I began this process in a GIS, I could easily go back and register my paper to be aligned with my now grouped contours, and then simply trace it in. But I didn't quite do that. In this video, yeah, good. You'll notice that instead, I use the contours as a visual reference. So in this video, I'm looking at my monitor for where the color ranges are, and then I'll sketch the highest contour for each color group, and then color it in its range with a medium to light pressure. And I like to start with the lower elevations first, and then move upward. So you see me doing the apple green and the pale sage right here. And this is another not real landscape. It's a warm-up sketch. I highly recommend doing warm-ups too, because you get to see how your pencils behave with your paper. And here it is after that step is applied. So it doesn't look spectacular for 2 reasons. Number 1 is it's a screenshot of a time-lapse video, because I didn't take a photo when I was done with it. And also, it shouldn't look spectacular yet, because you're getting the pigment on the page to work it around in the next step. So once you've colored in all your ranges with that medium to light pressure, you move on to step 5, which is blending. And this is where you really get to see the power of the soft, artist quality colored pencils. So you'll blend by taking the color of each group and coloring over the next lowest color with a medium to heavy pressure. So in this video, you see me coloring with that pale sage color over the apple green color with a medium to heavy pressure that's used on the lowest areas of the map. And by using this heavy pressure, the 2 waxes kind of heat up and they mix together, and then it gives a nice gradient look instead of a really harsh line between the boundaries. And then also, I take that pale sage over itself. So I color over the apple green, and then I color over the pale sage with that pale sage pencil. And to complete step 5, you repeat this process for each color in your palette, moving upward in elevation. And here's my warm-up sketch after step 5. And after step 5, you can be done if your drawing meets your desires. Or you could go on to step 6, which is the final step, color modulation. So shading with color is not specific to just mapping. Artists shade with color all the time. So how you complete step 6 is really determined by your own creative eye. Cooler colors for you want to use cooler colors on the shady slopes and warmer colors on the sunny slopes. I like to use a lot of dark green, purple, and lavender on the shady sides, and I like to use a lot of pale yellow, peach, and white on the sunny sides. And your pressure here really varies based on the pigment. I use really heavy pressure with those paler hues, and that really helps mix all the other waxes beneath it together. And if you have good pencils and good paper, you can put a lot of layers down. So don't be afraid to get thick with it. All right, so here's my warm-up sketch after the color modulation. And it's the actual photo this time. And here's the colors, the color modulation colors. You can see the shady slopes have lavender, purple, and dark green, and the brighter slopes have that pale yellow and peach, and even white, especially at the higher elevations. And here's my map in its current state. Still very much a work in progress. I did the hillshade by doing all those steps I just shared with you. All the other data on this map is vector, like hydro, roads, and labels. And I was really curious, I got really excited about this for some reason, to mix hyper-deliberate digital plus hand-drawn combinations. So I added, I knew you wouldn't be able to see it, but there's a really faint halftone on just the shadiest sides of the slope here, just because I wanted to play with the 2 sort of ideas of hand-drawn and digital. So thanks for letting me share this technique with you in a place that I love. And that's it.